A beat-up patrol car idles in the dead of night, engine growling low, vibrating through the torn leather seat. Inside, Officer Jake Carter slouches, restless, fingers hammering out a jittery beat on the steering wheel. It's a habit from too many sleepless shifts, the kind that wear a man down. Welcome to West Hollow, a Midwest ghost town where steel mills once roared, now just rusted husks and sagging row houses crumbling into the dirt. The dashboard clock burns red, 1:47 a.m. 3 hours to go, and the stillness is suffocating, pressing in like a chokehold he can't shake. Jake lets out a heavy sigh, breath clouding the icy air inside the cab. He squints through the windshield, eyes scanning the streets. Sodium lights buzz and flicker, throwing jagged shadows across busted sidewalks, drooping porches, and storefronts sealed tight with plywood. This place is a lost cause, he figures. A city where dreams went to rust when the factories shut down. Trouble festers here, in the cracked asphalt and graffiti-scrawled walls, among folks who stumble through life complaining instead of climbing out. He grew up an hour east, in a neat little suburb with green lawns and friendly nods. West Hollow? It's a punishment, a sentence he never signed up for. His breath rasps out, sharp and annoyed, as he tweaks the rearview mirror. Those blue eyes stare back, hard, tired, edged with lines carved by too many nights like this. 34 years old, but the job in this town make him feel a decade older. He nudges the cruiser forward, tires grinding over loose gravel, a slow roll through the emptiness. The radio crackles, spitting out routine calls. Nothing worth a damn. He picked night shifts for the extra cash, but the quiet eats at him worse than any firefight ever could. Then rolling past a shuttered gas station, its faded sign groaning in the wind, something catches his eye. An older black woman stands alone at the lot's edge, hunched against the cold, gripping a reusable shopping bag in one hand, a cane in the other. That bulky coat swallows her small frame, a knit cap pulled low over gray hair, hiding half her face in shadow. Jake leans in, eyes narrowing. What's she doing out here, he wonders, voice low in his head. Too old, too alone. It doesn't add up. Years on the beat have sharpened his gut, and it's yelling trouble loud and clear. Or maybe it's just the boredom, itching for a spark to light up the night. The cruiser rolled to a halt across the street, its headlights slashing through the night, pinning her in a harsh white glow. She stood there barely moving, just shifting her weight from one leg to the other. Her cane tapped the pavement, a faint rhythm against the stillness. A shopping bag hung loose from her hand, swaying as the wind kicked up. Through the windshield, Jake watched her, his jaw clenched tight. She wasn't pacing, wasn't glancing around nervously. But in West Hollow, that didn't mean much. Late nights here brought out the junkies, the drifters, the shadows you didn't trust. He'd seen it all. Teens with spray paint, dealers with baggies stashed in their socks. An old lady alone at this hour? She was either clueless or hiding something dark. 8 years on the force had sharpened his gut, or so he told himself. Deep down, he lived for the rush, the way his badge made people stiffen, avert their eyes. But this woman? She wasn't following the script. No twitchy shuffle, no stammered excuse. It gnawed at him. He cut the engine, and silence flooded in. Thick, oppressive. The street lay barren around them, just a stray cat bolting under a dumpster. Probably homeless, he thought, though that bag hinted at something else. Groceries? Stolen loot? Didn't matter. She was here, and that lit up every warning in his head. His door swung open, boots hitting the asphalt with a hard thud that cracked the night's hush. The duty belt creaked, gun, flashlight, cuffs all riding his hips, as he strode across the street, eyes fixed on her. She barely stirred, just turned her head slow, her face still cloaked in shadow beneath that cap. No jump, no retreat. It scraped at him, like she didn't get how this worked. "Hey," he snapped, his voice ripping through the quiet, bouncing off the gas station's chipped walls. She stopped, then faced him square, her eyes catching the light under that knit brim. No words, no fear, just that steady, unflinching look. He closed in fast, boots eating up the distance, stopping just a couple feet away. Up close, she looked ancient, deep lines etched into her dark skin, hands gnarled and worn under a patched-up coat. "What are you doing here?" he barked, his tone a blade, expecting her to buckle. She blinked, cool as ice. "I haven't done anything wrong, officer," she said, her voice soft but solid. "I'm just heading home." He scoffed, lip twisting. "Home? Past midnight? What's in the bag?" She raised it a touch, no rush in her move. "Just groceries." That calm, it hit him like a taunt, daring him to push harder, and he wasn't about to back down. Jake's voice dropped, low and jagged, slicing through the night. "Show me," he ordered, the menace hanging heavy in the air. She let out a sigh, soft and tired, then eased the bag open. Bread poked out, a half-gallon of milk gleamed, 2 cans of soup caught the street light's sickly yellow glow. Nothing dirty, nothing he could sink his teeth into. He squinted, frustration twisting tighter in his chest. He'd been hunting for a spark, drugs, a blade, anything to feed that gnawing hunch. But her calm stood like a brick wall, unyielding. "That's it?" he asked, his tone thick with disbelief, dripping like tar. She nodded, lips pressed into a thin line, offering nothing more. He stepped closer, boots scraping the asphalt, the sound rough against the quiet. "Let me see your ID," he snapped, palm thrust out, demanding. She moved slow, steady, pulling a battered wallet from her coat. The card slipped into his hand. Eleanor Brooks, 214 Elm Street, West Hollow. Local, legit. He flicked it back with a sharp snap of his wrist, eyes narrowing to slits. "Why are you really out here?" he pressed, leaning in close, his breath clouding the cold space between them. "I don't buy your story. What's the deal? Middle of the night. This neighborhood?" Her gaze locked on his, steady as granite. "I told you the truth, officer," she said, her voice a quiet anchor. "I'm just trying to get home. No need to treat me like a criminal." That hit him wrong. Her polite steel lit a match under his skin. How dare she? He was the law, not some street kid she could shrug off. "Lady," he spat, stepping in until their coats nearly grazed. "You don't tell me what I need to do. Wrong place, wrong time. I'll make sure you get that." The street held its breath, wind rattling a loose sign above. Shadows stretched long and twisted under the flickering lamps, tension choking the air. His chest heaved, coffee-stained breath punching through the chill. She didn't flinch. "I've lived here longer than you've been a cop," she said, soft but sure, her eyes never leaving his. "I know these streets better than most." His jaw locked tight. That wasn't what he wanted to hear. He craved fear, submission, not this quiet pushback. "Then you should know better than to be out here," he growled, voice scraping like gravel. "You know what goes down in West Hollow at night? Junkies, thieves. It's not safe for someone like you." She didn't blink. "I've seen worse than you can imagine, officer," she shot back, her calm cutting sharper than any yell. "Standing by a gas station isn't one of them." Her words smacked him hard, cool, controlled, peeling away his edge. He loomed over her now, boots inches from hers, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow that swallowed her small figure. Her coat carried a faint whiff of mothballs, her cap hiding glints of silver hair. "Let me tell you something," he hissed, fury straining at the leash. "You don't talk to me like that. You don't stand here acting like you're above the rules. You don't disrespect me." She tilted her head, sizing him up like he was a riddle, not a threat. "I'm not disrespecting you, officer," she said after a beat, her voice low but razor sharp. "I'm just not afraid of you." That broke it. Rage roared up, white hot, pounding in his veins. No one got away with that, not in his town, not on his watch. She was supposed to cower, not meet his glare head on. "You should be," he snarled, his hand twitching near his belt. "You don't know who you're messing with." Her eyes darted to the motion, quick and keen, but she didn't budge, rooted there, unshaken. Eleanor's eyes drilled into him, unblinking, and Jake felt his gut twist hard. "You don't know who you're talking to, Officer Carter," she said, her voice soft but loaded, heavy with something he couldn't place. His name rolled off her tongue, sharp and electric. How'd she know? His tag, he told himself, shoving the unease deep. But it stuck there, a jagged splinter in his brain. "You think you're smart?" he spat, venom seeping through every word. "Think you're better than me?" "I never said that," she answered, her tone still maddeningly steady, like a lake undisturbed. "I'm just trying to get home," he snapped, lunging forward, closing the gap until no air stood between them. "You're lying. I see it in your eyes," he growled, desperate to tear through her wall. Her stare held firm, unflinching. "What do you see, officer?" The question dangled there, taunting him, hollowing him out. He had nothing, just rage boiling over, slipping through his fingers. "Listen," he snarled, his voice shaking with fury. "You don't walk away from this. Not after disrespecting me. You'll learn your place." She watched him silent, her calm a blade twisting in his gut. 8 years on these streets, he'd bent everyone until her. His hand lashed out, fast and wild, clamping onto her thin arm, yanking her forward. She stumbled, a flash of pain crossing her face, but no sound escaped. The bag jerked, her cane teetered as she caught her balance. "Let go," she said, low and firm, a command wrapped in quiet. His grip tightened, her fragile bones creaking under his fingers. A voice screamed in his skull, "Stop!" But the rage roared louder, swallowing it whole. "No," he barked, dragging her closer. "You don't call the shots, I do." Her eyes met his, steady as ever. "Is this about me, Officer Carter, or you?" The words cut deep, raw and real, peeling him open. "Shut up!" he roared, his voice splintering in the air. Her silence hit back harder, loud in its stillness, laying bare every fracture in his shield. She wasn't scared, and it shattered him. His free hand flew up, fist slamming into her cheek with a wet, brutal thud. Too hard, harder than he'd meant. She reeled, the blow knocking her off her feet. Her cane crashed to the pavement, bags spilling, cans rolled free, bread bounced into the gutter. She dropped to one knee, hand slapping the ground, a thin line of blood staining her lip. Jake stood there, chest heaving, breath tearing out in ragged bursts. The echo of the punch pulsed in his ears, his knuckles burning against the night's chill. For a heartbeat, triumph flared. He'd smashed her calm, put her in her place, but it faded fast, souring into something cold. She wiped the blood with a trembling hand, then rose, slow and sure, her eyes finding his again. No fear, no tears. Just a deep, heavy disappointment that sank into him like lead. "You'll regret that," she said, her voice quiet but thick with a promise that iced his spine. His chest pounded, adrenaline curdling into dread. He opened his mouth, clawing for a comeback, something to snatch control back, but nothing came. The street tilted around him, empty and silent, the wind rattling the gas station sign like a warning. Her words settled in, heavy and unshakable. He'd crossed a line, and some dark instinct whispered there was no way back. Jake's throat locked up, her quiet certainty slashing deeper than the blow he'd landed. He opened his mouth, scrambling for words, for control, but nothing came. Then she moved, slow, steady, slipping a hand into her coat. His instincts fired, hands snapping to his gun, fingers gripping tight. A weapon? His pulse hammered, chest tight, but her hand came back with a small black wallet, flipped open in one smooth motion. An FBI badge flashed, gold and silver glinting under the streetlight's haze. "I'm Special Agent Eleanor Brooks," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "Undercover." "You just made a big mistake, Officer Carter." The ground tilted beneath him. His breath snagged, eyes glued to that badge, FBI. He'd struck a Fed. Panic clawed up his spine, sharp and cold, his hand falling from the gun, dangling useless at his side. 8 years, his career, his whole damn life, gone in the split-second crack of fist on flesh. "Backup's coming," she said, stepping closer, her calm unshaken. "You'll answer for this." Sirens whined in the distance, growing louder, tightening like a noose around his neck. His brain screamed, "Run, swing, do something," but his boots stayed planted, heavy as stone. "You don't understand," he rasped, voice raw and ragged. "This wasn't supposed to happen." "You made it happen," she fired back, relentless. "You chose." "I didn't know," he blurted, desperation spilling out, wild and messy. "You're undercover. I thought you were just..." "Just what?" she cut in, her tone icy, slicing clean through him. "Someone you could push around? Someone who didn't matter?" His jaw clamped shut, shame scorching his cheeks. She nailed it. He'd seen her as nothing, a punching bag for his rage. Now she held his world in her hands. Lights flared around the corner. Black SUVs and squad cars screeched in, tires smoking on the asphalt. Doors burst open, agents in crisp suits poured out, faces carved from stone. "Agent Brooks," a tall one said, dipping his head with respect. "You okay?" "Fine," she answered, sharp and short. "He gave me plenty." Jake's gaze flicked. A tiny camera glinted at her collar. Recorded. Every snarl, every swing. Captured forever. His stomach plummeted, cold sweat beating on his skin. "You set me up," he whispered, voice cracking like glass. She turned, her eyes boring into him. "I didn't need to, Carter. You set yourself up, showed your true colors the second you raised your fist." Agents moved in, hands clamping his shoulders, firm and unyielding. Cuffs snapped shut, metal biting his wrists. He didn't fight, couldn't. His head reeled. The precinct, the badge, everything he'd clawed for turning to ash. They dragged him to the car, boots scraping the ground. He twisted back. Eleanor stood there, bruise blooming dark on her cheek, watching with that same steady calm. "This isn't just you," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos, low and clear. "It's your whole department, your system. We're taking it all down." The door slammed, her words echoing as the cruiser peeled away. Sirens dimmed, leaving only the thump of his heartbeat. Jake stared at his cuffed hands, the chill seeping deep. 8 years on the force, nights bending rules, cracking skulls that couldn't hit back, all leading here. A cell, a Fed, a reckoning. He'd thought the badge made him invincible, a king in this concrete jungle. Now it was a shackle, and the real nightmare was just rolling in. Jake slumped against the cold concrete wall, the cell's fluorescent buzz gnawing at his brain. West Hollow's lockup reeked, bleach mixed with old sweat, the air heavy and bitter. His uniform sagged, creased and dirty from the night's mess. The cuffs were gone, but their bite lingered, a dull throb in his wrists. He stared at the walls, scratched up graffiti, names, swears, dates, wondering how the hell he'd landed here. trapped in the same cage he tossed others into 100 times. His mind kept replaying it. The punch, the snap of his fist against Eleanor's cheek, her stumble, those groceries spilling across the pavement. He'd felt strong, in control, damn near justified, until that badge glared back at him. Now it looped endlessly, a film stuck on repeat. 8 years clawing up the ranks, earning slaps on the back from Kessler, all torched by one reckless swing. He scrubbed his face, stubble scraping his hands, and muttered low, "How'd I let it spiral this far?" Footsteps rang out, sharp and heavy down the hall. He jolted up, pulse kicking. Kessler, maybe, with a lifeline. No chance. Eleanor Brooks appeared, flanked by two suits, their ties stark against the precinct's grimy haze. Her bruise stood out, swollen and dark under the harsh light, but she carried herself like steel, shoulders square, head high. No mercy in her eyes, just icy purpose. An agent swung the cell door open, the clang bouncing off the walls. She stepped in, her stare pinning him like a bug under glass. "You look like hell," she said, her voice a blade slicing through the fog. He swallowed, throat rough as sand. "I didn't mean it," he croaked, barely a whisper. She tilted her head, eyes sharp and unforgiving. "Didn't mean to hit me? Or lose it on a Fed?" Shame flared hot in his chest. No words worked. "I didn't know who you were," he pushed out, voice splintering. "I thought you were just, someone you could bully," she finished, stepping closer, closing the gap. "How many complaints, Carter? How many times you stepped over the line and walked free?" His gaze dropped, the floor blurring gray. He knew. Too many swept under Kessler's rug, laughed off over cheap beers. "You think you're special," she pressed, voice dropping low, hard as stone. "Above the law, untouchable, better than the ones who get nabbed." "I was doing my job," he fired back, a spark of fight rising. "Keeping streets safe. Safe from people like me?" Her eyes tightened, lethal now. "People who don't kneel when you swing your crown?" His fists balled up, nails digging into his skin. She had him pegged, and it stung deep. "This isn't just you," she said, her tone lifting, cutting sharper. "Your department's rotten, root to crown. You're part of the stench." His gut dropped. Kessler's ghost loomed large, his mentor, his armor. "What do you want?" he asked, voice shaking. "Talk," she said, blunt and brutal. "Give me Kessler, the others. Names, dates, dirt. Betray Tom? The guy who'd hauled him up? Patched his mistakes?" "I can't," he whispered, head shaking slow. "You don't have a choice," she snapped back. "Assaulting a Fed. Prison's waiting. Cooperate. We cut a deal. Clam up. You're on your own. Loyalty or survival?" His head reeled, Kessler's gruff voice rumbling in his ears. "We take care of our own." But where was he now? "I need time," he mumbled, eyes locked on the floor. "Not much left," she said, cold and final. "Walls are closing. Help us, or go down with the ship." She turned, heels snapping sharp as the door slammed shut. Silence crashed in, the choice twisting like a blade in his ribs. He sank back, hands gripping his head, the cell's chill sinking into his marrow. Outside, the precinct buzzed faintly, radios crackling, boots shuffling. But in here, it was just him, the weight, and a clock ticking louder every second. Jake's arrest ripped through West Hollow like a firebomb. By morning, the news was screaming, "Rogue cop attacks FBI agent in shocking confrontation." By noon, the precinct was a war zone. Protests surging, hundreds deep, signs slashing the air with "Justice Now" and "End the Abuse." Voices broke raw, years of fury spilling out, fists raised against the cold, wet gray. Eleanor Brooks watched it unfold from a cramped FBI outpost above a hardware store. TVs flickering with her bruised face, in Jake's perp walk. The proof was ironclad. Body cam, audio, a stack of old complaints finally dug up. Jake lit the match. The precinct was dry wood waiting to burn. Paul Grayson, her boss, paced behind her, tie hanging loose, sleeves shoved up. A lean, hard-edged man in his 50s, gray hair buzzed tight, he carried the weight of decades in the bureau. "This is bigger than Carter," he said, voice low and taut. The whole precinct's trembling. Eleanor nodded, pressing a hand to her aching cheek. "They've been waiting for this. Carter's not the root. Kessler is." "We need him to flip," Grayson pushed, slapping a file on the table. "He's our key to Kessler." She knew it, but Jake's fear ran bone deep. Tom Kessler wasn't just his captain, he was the precinct's iron spine, crushing anything that dared to bend for 20 years. Night fell, and Eleanor stormed the lockup. The precinct hummed low, officers creeping through the halls, heads down. Guilt or paranoia? She couldn't read it. Jake slumped in his cell, back against the wall, face washed out under the jittery light. His bloodshot eyes locked on hers, hollowed out, hunted. "You're still here," she said, leaning on the bars. "Figured Kessler would have gotten you already." He flinched, shoulders curling in. "He'll kill me if I talk," he croaked, voice scraped raw. "He'll try either way," she shot back, closing in. "Help us, we'll keep you breathing." His shaky hand raked through his hair, stubble shadowing his ghost-pale face. "You don't get it," he whispered. "We're all dirty. Me, Kessler, the whole damn place." Her pulse jumped. He was breaking, spilling secrets she'd hunted for months. "Then clean it up," she pressed, voice low and fierce. "You can walk away, Carter. Start fresh." Fear choked him. "I can't," he muttered, eyes dropping to the floor. "He's got too much on me." She exhaled hard, stepping back. "I'll be here for your transfer. You'll be safe then." "Thanks," he mumbled as she turned away, faint and broken, for the chance. She nodded, but a cold twist in her gut warned her. Kessler wouldn't let him slide that easy. Dawn crept in, gray and frigid. Eleanor gunned it to the lockup, hands tight on the wheel. The air felt wrong, too quiet, too dead. Grayson had confirmed it. Transfer locked in, all green. But her instincts roared otherwise. The precinct squatted under a heavy sky, a brick bunker waiting to crack. A lone guard waved her through, his face pinched tight. Inside, the halls rang hollow, just a janitor dragging a mop in lazy loops. She hit the cell block, hand hovering near her gun. Jake's door hung wide open. She stopped cold, breath snagging. He sprawled on the floor, eyes half-lidded, empty. No chest rise, no sound, just a lifeless shell. "No," she hissed, dropping to feel his pulse. Nothing. His skin was ice against her fingers, dead for hours. No blood, no bruises, just gone. Kessler. She stood, legs unsteady, rage surging hot. He'd snuffed Jake before he could spill. She dialed Grayson, voice flat as stone. "Carter's dead. Kessler got him." "How?" he snapped, coiled tight. No signs, quiet job. He was ready to flip. "Damn it," Grayson growled. "Anything on Kessler?" "Not yet," she said, voice grim. "But he's desperate now." Phone logs came fast. Kessler's calls last night, one to a burner linked to Ray Vance, a local thug with a bloody resume. "We've got a thread," Grayson said. "Pull it hard." The team kicked into gear. Warrants dropped, eyes locked on every move. Vance was scooped up by noon, a lean, twitchy guy with a rap sheet that could wallpaper the precinct. He folded fast under the heat. "Kessler paid me $2,000 to shut Carter up, slipped something in his food. Quiet, clean." Outside, protests roared louder, the city a bomb ready to blow. Eleanor stood in the FBI office, staring at the chaos on the screens. Jake's death wasn't the end. It was kerosene. Kessler thought he'd slipped the noose, but he just loaded her gun. She balled her fists, resolve turning to steel. Time to take him down. Dawn broke over West Hollow, casting a golden sheen as Eleanor stood on the precinct steps, her breath curling in the sharp morning air. Today was the day Tom Kessler's reign would end. Vance's confession, locked tight on tape and paper, plus Kessler's burner calls, had sealed his fate. Warrants burned in their hands, the team coiled and ready, Paul Grayson's voice cutting through, agents strapping on vests, racking slides. Months of creeping in the shadows led to this, a hammer drop for the precinct's untouchable titan. Grayson stepped up beside her, lines carved deep in his face, eyes glinting with focus. "Ready?" he asked, calm and solid. "It's time," she answered, jaw locked tight. They charged in, badges flashing like steel in the sun. The front desk froze. Two green cops stared, jaws slack, as agents spread out, locking down doors, shouting orders. "FBI, nobody moves." Hushed murmurs buzzed, glances darted wild. Kessler's office loomed at the hall's end, door sealed, blinds clamped shut. Eleanor's pulse kicked hard, her hand hovering near her gun. Grayson hammered the door with his fist. "Lieutenant Kessler, FBI, open it up." Silence hung heavy, stretching thin. She shot Grayson a look. Was he armed? Bolted? The knob twisted slow, and there he stood. Kessler, 6'2", broad as a wall, gray hair slicked tight. His face stayed cool, but his eyes betrayed him. A flicker of defiance, a hint of dread. "What's this about?" he asked, voice sliding, smooth like grease. "You know," Eleanor said, stepping in close, her words a blade. "You're under arrest. Murder of Jake Carter? Corruption? Obstruction?" He didn't blink, just shifted aside as agents poured in. Grayson spun him fast, cuffs snapping shut with a crisp, cold click. "Hands behind you, Lieutenant." Kessler obeyed, jaw clenched, no resistance. Not yet. Eleanor hit his desk, yanking drawers, papers spilling, files, pens, a stale coffee mug. Then her fingers grazed leather. A small notebook, buried deep. She cracked it open, names scratched in tight, jagged lines. Cops, snitches, payoffs. Dates ran back years, a map of decay. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "This nails it," she breathed, tucking it into her jacket. Outside, the crowd roared. News vans shoved in, cameras flared. Agents hauled Kessler out, his navy jacket creased, cuffs catching the light. Protests exploded. "Lock him up. Crashed against cops. Protect us." He held his head high, face a stone wall, but Eleanor saw it, the shake in his shoulders, the sweat gleaming at his hairline. He knew the game was up. They stuffed him into an SUV, the door banging shut with a thud that punched through the chance. Grayson swiped his forehead, voice low. "We did it." Eleanor nodded, the wind tasting sharp and sour. Kessler was finished, but the notebook pressed against her chest. More names, more battles looming. "It's a start," she said, eyes on the crowd. Kids hoisted signs, an old man jabbed the air with his fist. West Hollow stirring, hungry for more. The precinct towered behind them, a battered shell, its dirty secrets bleeding into the light. Back at the office, she slapped the ledger on the table. Grayson let out a low whistle. "This is bigger than we thought. Half the precinct's tangled in here." Her finger traced the ink. Kessler's kingdom, forged in cash and corpses. Jake was just a piece he tossed aside to save it. Now it was hers to tear apart, brick by grimy brick. The precinct steps pulsed with raw energy as Kessler's car peeled out. Justice, and no more lies, crashed through the air in rolling waves. Eleanor stood in the thick of it, the notebook a solid weight against her chest. Cameras popped, reporters barked questions, but she blocked it all, her focus locked on the crowd. A teenage girl gripped a sign for "My brother," tears cutting tracks down her cheeks. An old guy in a worn Union jacket bellowed till his voice gave out. West Hollow wasn't cheering. It was spitting out decades of choked-down silence. Grayson's hand landed on her shoulder, heavy and rough with wear. "Think we'll clean it all?" She scanned the faces, rage, hope, a desperate hunger, and let out a slow breath. "We'll get what we can," she said. "It's a weed. Yank one, another sprouts. But this," she patted her jacket, the ledger's edge pressing back, "this gives us roots to rip up." He nodded, face hard but grounded. "Change takes time. They're loud now. Keep 'em screaming." She turned, the sun climbing high, throwing long shadows across the busted pavement. The precinct towered behind, its brick skin pitted and faded, a battered relic of the rot they'd pried open. Jake's death clung to her, a shadow that wouldn't fade. He'd been dirty, sure, but caged too. Kessler's gear, ground down to keep the wheels spinning. She'd thrown him a lifeline. He'd balked. Now he was a dead hero for the wrong team, his blood the match that torched this blaze. That night, Eleanor sank into her tiny apartment, blinds cracked to let the city's glow seep in. West Hollow stretched out below, streetlights stuttering, horns whining soft in the distance. The ledger sprawled across her coffee table, pages fanned out, a blueprint of filth she'd only started to unravel. Her cheek throbbed, bruise softening but still sore, a mark she'd earned. She'd gone deep, bet everything, and tugged the first loose thread. Kessler was caged, a system laid bare, a city waking up with a roar. Rest wasn't an option. Her phone buzzed. Grayson's text. "We made a difference. Rest." A faint smile tugged her lips as she set it aside. They had Kessler in chains, a machine exposed, a town finding its voice. But sleep? Not tonight. She leaned back, eyes roaming the skyline. The war wasn't won. More fights waited, more names to hunt. Jake's panic, Kessler's swagger. They'd kick this off, but the people outside, their shouts, they'd push it further. She rose, drifting to the window. Lights winked across the city, a messy quilt of lives tangled in this chaos. She'd lost Jake, nearly lost herself, but cracked something open. A fissure in the wall, a shot at something new. Tomorrow she'd dive back in, dig harder, hit deeper. For now, she let the stillness creep in, the burden lifting just a hair. "We're not done," she murmured, breath clouding the glass. West Hollow wasn't either, and she'd be right there, braced for the next round.